Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this. I'm Reverend Julie Stoneberg. I'm the interim minister at UU Church West, and it's great to be here with all of you. As we gather, let us acknowledge that the history of what we call Wisconsin includes the tragic treatment of the indigenous peoples who were careful stewards of the land from before the first European settlers arrived. Those of us who are not indigenous benefit from that tragic history. Where I am, this land was formerly inhabited by the native peoples of the 7 council fires, Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Menominee, Peoria, and Miami nations. Of those, only the Forest County Potawatomi community currently has land rights, which is less than 7 acres of trust land in the vicinity. And I encourage all of you, wherever you are, to take note of and honor the peoples who were here before you. Let us pledge ourselves to working for reconciliation and good relations with all the original peoples of this place. We also acknowledge our need to address racism, which continues to lead to the violent deaths of Black and Indigenous peoples. We know that anti-Black racism and settler colonialism perpetuate inequalities, injustices, poverty, and exclusion in U.S. society. We commit ourselves to being an anti-racist faith dedicated to equity and racial justice. With those words, I am going to light a chalice. And I do that with the words of Reverend Sean Neil Barron, called "Your Body is Welcome Here." Your body is welcome here. All of it. Yes, even that part, and yes, even that part. The parts you love, the parts you don't. For in this time and place, we come with all that we are, all that we have been, and all that we're going to be. Our bodies are constantly changing. Cells die and cells are reborn. We respond to infections and disease. Sometimes we can divorce them from our bodies, and other times they become a permanent part of us. Your body and all that it is and all that's within it, both wanted and not wanted, has a place here. Our bodies join in a web of co-creation, created and creating, constantly changing us, scarred and tattooed, tense and relaxed, diseased and cured, unfamiliar and intimate, formed in infinite diversity of creation. Your body is welcome here, all of it. So take a moment and welcome it. Take a moment to feel it. Take a moment to be in it. And with those words, I will light our chalice. With that, I'm going to turn the screen over to Karen Zimmerman.
Hello, welcome to Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UU's panel presentation on the book My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. Hello, my name is Karen Zimmerman. I'm a member of UUC Church West and one of the members of the Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UU planning team for this event. The pronouns I use are she, her, and hers. I'm a white woman with blondish hair wearing a black shirt and dark gray sweater, and I have glasses. Before we start today's program, I have a few announcements to make. To use the captioning feature of Zoom, please click on the show caption icon located on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If you wish to turn off the captions, click Hide Captions. If the caption icon is not on your toolbar, go to the bottom right-hand side of your screen and click on the 3 dots or more button. Click on the Captions button, then click on Show Captions. There will be time at the end of each panelist's presentation to ask questions. We also may have time for further questions after the whole presentation. Please put your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the screen. Questions will be only going to the moderators and panelists. If you don't have a Q&A feature on your screen and it's not quite working, please send the questions to Tech Support Lee in the chat box. This panel presentation is being recorded for future viewing, and there's going to be a short intermission after our first presenter. Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs are also planning to hold a reflection and discussion sessions about the book. Please look for announcements in your congregation about sign up in the future. Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs is a collaboration of 5 Unitarian Universalist congregations in Milwaukee, Waukesha, and Ozaukee counties. The group works together to facilitate racial justice education within our congregations and to coordinate and amplify the voice of Unitarian Universalists in racial justice work and actions within the greater Milwaukee metro area. The collaboration started in November 2015 in response to the 2015 UU General Assembly action of immediate witness, encouraging UU congregations to take action in support of Black Lives Matter and other Black-led racial justice movements, fighting for racial justice against the harsh racial practices to which many Black people are subjected. Since January 2016, Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs has conducted numerous workshops, bringing together members of all 5 congregations to learn about Black Lives Matter, white privilege and white supremacy, reparations, and the roles of whites as allies in the work for racial justice. These workshops helped congregants develop skills for interacting in multiracial situations, discussing racism productively, and taking collective action. Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs also encouraged congregants to engage in actions in support of police violence victims, to change the police practices in our communities, and to support efforts by the Wisdom Organization to reduce mass incarceration in Wisconsin. Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UU's Leadership Working Group, in the spirit of reparations, has been accumulating a relatively small fund from contributions from our congregations and congregants. In June 2022, our 5 congregation collaborative has sent its first disbursement to support work in the Milwaukee area. If you're able to join in this effort to address the wealth gap that persists as a legacy of slavery and continuing racial oppression, we have ways to do that. This information on the slide will be sent in a follow-up email to you. So today, at times, information from this panel presentation, reading the book, My Grandmother's Hands, or any activities today may trigger something within you. Recognize that your emotions and reactions may be sensitive, and you may be more reactive than usual. That is normal when emotions and trauma have been repressed and are now triggered. Please pay attention to your body. Pause, breathe, and check with yourself about what you need. When you recognize what you need in the moment, do it. Don't put it off. Take the time to do whatever yourself has told you it needs. You may need to temporarily leave your screen and engage in self-care. You may decide you need to leave this presentation. Making time to tend to your own well-being is essential. And next I will turn it back to Reb Julie for the meditation.
Thanks, Karen. Be on that in just a sec. Get back to here. Turn on my video. Oh, sorry. Oops. Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Karen, for all that information. So I'm assuming that many of you have read this book and many of you haven't. And either way, it's great that you're here today. One of the things that you may be aware of is that this book has many body practices embedded within it, and they're really integral to experiencing the book. The author recommends that you do each exercise as you're reading before you continue to read, because it's important to experience your body in order to fully understand what this book is about. And the exercises in the book are intentional in their placement. They're related to what you're reading and to what will come following that body practice. And when you do any of the activities in this book, Menakem tells us that it's possible, as Karen just said, that your body may have some unusual or unfamiliar reaction. You might start shaking or tingling. You might laugh or cry or burp or fart or feel hot or cold. And whatever the response, know that it's normal, however unusual it feels to you. It's normal because it can mean that you may have released an energy that was stuck somewhere in your body. So if your reaction is extreme, while this is unlikely, it is important to stop, to do what you need to do, to take a few slow breaths to help your body settle and to seek support if you need it. So rather than taking one of the body practices in this book out of context, I'm going to share with you and invite you into the very first practice in the book. And first I need to explain Menakem's use of the terms clean pain and dirty pain. Quoting him directly, he says that clean pain is a pain that mends and that can build your capacity for growth. It's pain you experience when you know exactly what you need to do or say, when you really don't want to do or say it, and when you do it anyway. And it's also the pain you experience when you have no idea what to do, when you're scared or worried about what might happen, and when you step forward into that unknown anyway with honesty and vulnerability. So that's clean pain. Dirty pain is the pain of avoidance or blame or denial. So when people respond from their most wounded parts and become cruel or violent or physically or emotionally run away from what's happening, then they experience dirty pain. And in that process, they create more of it for themselves and for others. And I tell you those two descriptions of clean and dirty pain because they're part of this exercise. So I invite you into the first practice in this beautiful book. It's called Body-Centered Practice. So first, take a moment to ground yourself in your own body. Pay attention, notice the outline of your skin and the slight pressure of the air around it. Experience the firmer pressure of the chair or bed or couch beneath you. The pressure of the ground or the floor beneath your feet. Can you sense hope in your body? Where? How does your body experience that hope? Is it a release or an expansion? A tightening born of eagerness or anticipation? Where can you sense hope? And what specific hopes accompany those sensations? The chance to heal, to be free from the burden of racialized trauma, to live a bigger, deeper life. Do you experience any fear in your body? If so, where? How does it manifest? As tightness? As a painful radiance? As a dead, hard spot? What worries accompany the fear? Are you afraid your life will be different in ways you can't predict? Are you afraid of facing clean pain? Are you worried you will choose dirty pain instead? Do you feel the raw, wordless fear and perhaps excitement that heralds change? What pictures appear in your mind as you experience that fear? If your body feels both hopeful and afraid, congratulations. You're just where you need to be for what comes next. Take a few more breaths. Open your eyes and come back into this space.
Thank you very much, Rev Julie. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter today, Sienna Lytle. She is passionate about people. Her life passion is creating and cultivating spaces rooted in diversity, equity, and belonging that promote understanding and fruitful outcomes within the human experience. Sienna spent 15 years in the corporate benefits and consulting space before landing at Hubspot in 2022 as a senior manager on the diversity, inclusion, and belonging team. Sienna is pursuing a degree in sociology and also obtained a diversity and inclusion certification from Cornell University in 2021. Combining her extensive background in corporate operations with her passion for people, equity is a lifelong goal and purpose that Sienna has the honor of living out every day. Sienna enjoys quality time and new fun experiences with her friends and family, mainly her outdoorsy husband and teenage son. At home in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, where they are guests on the ancestral homeland of the Menominee, Fox, Muscoutin, Sauk, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Ho-Chunk tribes. Welcome, Sienna.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sienna. My pronouns are she and her, and today I have on black square glasses, I have brown skin every day, and a buzz cut short hair and a gray sweatshirt with some cool messaging on it. So I'm very, very, very happy to be here with you all. Thank you to Karen. Thank you to Reverend Julie and all the other panelists for putting this amazing event together. This book, My Grandmother's Hands, is one that has literally changed my life. It's a book that I've read several times, and each time I get something new out of it. And I'm really excited to talk to y'all about it today. So I will share. Can you see my screen now? Perfect. Okay. Let me set my timer here. All right, so first thing first, a quick PSA about this book. Everyone should read this book. It's really for everyone, no matter what your background is, no matter where you live, if you live in the United States or somewhere else, this book is literally for everyone. So it's one that no matter what your background is, what your level of experience is with the topic area, it's one that everyone should read. So you all are here because you're interested in the book, which is exciting to me, but I really encourage you all to share the book with your friends and your family, anybody who will listen, because it really is for everyone. So I'm just going to give a quick overview, and I'll first start off with just a little bit about the author, Resmaa Menakem. Resmaa Menakem is a licensed therapist and a New York Times bestselling author. He specializes in trauma, body-centered psychotherapy, and violence prevention. He also teaches about a concept called somatic abolitionism, which is basically living out your life by embodying anti-racism practices in your culture building, in your daily life, and even within your own self and in your own body. And all of that requires endurance, agility, resource cultivation, stamina, discernment, self and communal discipline, a lot of things, and all of that embodied in racial literacy and humility. So it's definitely something that requires work, both physical and cognitive labor. But like my grandfather used to say, favor ain't fair and freedom ain't free, right? So when we want to see change and we want to make change, we have to work at it. And somatic abolitionism is a great way to start that process, that work. So in the book, there's really three main themes in the book. One is that racism lives in our bodies as racial trauma. So a lot of folks sometimes have the preconceived notion, really because of the conditioning that we have in society, that racism is only, when you see the tiki torches on the news or some very overt act of racism. But the fact is that racism is the result of racial trauma, and trauma is something that lives in our bodies and that subconsciously we deal with whether we realize it or not. So that is a big revelation in this book and something that is really important for all of us to understand. Secondly, racial trauma compounds over time between people and through generations. So we have, we all come from somewhere. We've got parents, we've got grandparents, we've got ancestors all down the line. And the fact is that racial trauma, just like other types of trauma, can be pathologically passed down generation to generation, even if you feel like you are exempt from some of the bad parts of it. It's something that we all are affected by, whether you're white, Black, no matter what your ethnicity or racial identity is, it's something that we're all affected by. And then lastly, there's the theme that healing this trauma starts in the body, and then it continues into our cultures and communities. This is a theme that really changed my life as a practitioner for social justice, for diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I was doing a lot of work and a lot of action outside of my body, in my community, within my culture. And as a practitioner, that can really wear on you, mentally and physically. And when we realize that the trauma that we're trying to fix in the outside world actually starts within our bodies, it helps us heal our individual trauma that we have, but it also helps us become stronger so that we can protect ourselves while we do the work in the community. So in the book, there's really three different reader perspectives. He talks about Black bodies, white bodies, and police bodies. This is a really great way to sort of categorize and organize the information that he shares in the book. And no matter what body you hold, that whichever body or container that you identify with, there's still so much great information to learn about all of the bodies and the reader perspectives that he talks about. So when he talks about Black bodies, he's talking about Black people that are melanated, that have melanated skin, and that have the lived experiences, particularly in the United States, but this can be applied to the Pan-African diaspora, so all over the world. But he's really talking about those experiences and how white body supremacy, which I'll talk about in a second, affects Black bodies. For white bodies, it's a lot about looking at what you're feeling inside of your body when you see things, when you hear certain things, and really kind of getting in tune with your natural, kind of like your first gut reaction to what you're seeing and hearing about in terms of racism and race relations around you. So you may not have the same experiences, you may not have the same even physical body experiences, but you are having some experiences, right? So in all of that, it stems from the same racial trauma that all of us experience. And then police bodies is really, really interesting. And I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end, but no matter what race you identify with, police bodies require a very specific type of body practice, a very specific type of noticing with what's going on in your body so that police bodies can do their jobs to the best of their ability and really protect themselves, but also understand the significance for the work that they do in the community as well. So some of the key ideas from the book, and these are really more like definitions. First is that race is a myth, right? A lot of us understand this, that race is a human-invented classification system that was invented as a way to define physical differences between people, but has more often been used as a tool for oppression and violence. So when we talk about race, when we talk about Black people or white people, yes, there are, physical indicators that sort of make sense, right? When we categorize it that way. But really, when we look deeper, the separation of and the classification of different races was really constructed. Like somebody thought about it and said, this is how we're going to do it, right? And we've all sort of been conditioned in our society through several hundreds of years of sort of living out this myth that we are so different and we are classed differently because of the way that our physical appearances look. Next is the concept of white body supremacy. So you may have heard of the term white supremacy, and Resmaa Menakem doesn't use that term. He uses white body supremacy. And the reason for this is because white supremacy, when we think about it oftentimes, if we're not someone who is actively acting in a way that would constitute as white supremacy, or if we're not white, right? Like if we find ourselves removed from it. And really what he wants to say by calling it white body supremacy is that if you have a white body, then this concept of white body supremacy, white supremacy is something that you grapple with no matter where you are on your acumen of racial issues, no matter what you feel in your heart, no matter what your intentions are. We all of us deal with it, but with white body supremacy, it's that concept that white body, no matter what person, spirit that is occupying that body, it's that concept that if you have that white body, then you are supreme standard, you're the supreme standard, which all other bodies are measured and judged, whether you believe that or not. That's the way that society recognizes it, based on that social constructed myth of race. And then racial trauma, which is also known as race-based traumatic stress, is the cumulative effect of racism on an individual's mental and physical health. So a lot of people, especially people who endure and are on the receiving end of racial abuse, big and small, understand what this feels like, but don't always have the language for it to sort of put a pin on it. But a lot of studies have shown, and I believe we'll get more into this further on into the discussion today, that there's an actual biological response, the fight or flight, the activation of the vagus nerve response that occurs as a result of someone experiencing racism. And that's what racial trauma is. Next is clean and dirty pain. Reverend Julie talked about this at the top of the meeting. So clean pain is choosing integrity over fear and standing in that fear with integrity, moving towards the unknown. It's doing it afraid, and it's using the pain that results from that trauma and transforming it into a positive motivator to build up resilience. Dirty pain is the opposite. It's responding to the fear and conflict from our most wounded parts. It is coming on the attack or coming on the defense. It is becoming emotional and victimizing, by crying or something else as a way to sort of separate yourself from what's really going on and what the real issue is. That's dirty pain. Body practice or body-centered practice is what we did with our meditation. It's the active practice of listening to your body first. I feel like a lot of us can do better with that, and me included. Of a lot of times we use our brains first and not our bodies to sort of tell us what to do and tell us how to respond. So using that body practice, which is a practice, so it's something that you got to do over and over again, is the way that you sort of center yourself and listen to your body, breathe, deep breathing, grounding, looking towards your ancestors for coping mechanisms. It's using what you have, this very intelligent container, to get through whatever the situation is that you're in. He also talks about in the book the 5 anchors. So these are 5 body practices that help us move through that clean pain. It is self-soothing. The title of the book is called My Grandmother's Hands because Resmaa Menakem had a really close relationship with his grandmother. And as he was doing this work, he realized his grandmother was doing a lot of body practices without even realizing it, kind of like rocking or, patting yourself, hugging yourself. That's self-soothing. Noticing, accepting discomfort, staying present, discharging leftover energy. That's a big one. And then culture healing. So when we heal with the body first, then we can create a culture of anti-racism and heal our communities collectively. That is the act of what a lot of us do when we get out into the community. We come together to sort of push ahead, change, and make impact. That is healing our culture. So that's a little bit about the book, a little bit about me and my story. So I wanted to start off with sharing some of my social identities because they're really important for you to know. They influence my life experiences in society, how society views me, not always how I view myself, but they really impact the lens in which I do my work and sort of receive and see all of the aspects of a lot of the topics that are talked about in the book. So I am a Black cisgender woman. I'm a mom and a wife in a blended family. I'm also neurodivergent. I'm autistic and have ADHD, so very busy brain up here. And I also work in diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. Because of the work that I do, because of my social identity, because of the different roles that I have in my family, in my circles, because of the brain that I have, this book has been really, really influential to me because it allows me to gain skills and tools so that I can move through not only just the trauma, but really just the realities that come with all of these social identities. It's a way, by using body practice, by noticing, by self-soothing, I'm able to be a lot more authentic, be my authentic self. I'm a Black girl who likes to go fishing. I love that. And I can be proud of that because of the authenticity that I have using the body practices and the tools that I've learned from this book. So I want to share a little story about my first interaction with generational racial trauma. So this is a picture of me and my dad, and it always makes me laugh because you can tell my dad's trying to talk to me and tell me stuff, and I'm just like over here. Let's go to the story of my life with my dad. Me and my dad are very, very, very close. I am a lot like him. I have a younger sister, and there's two of us, and me and my dad have very similar personalities, and my sister and my mom have very similar personalities. So me and my dad have always done so many things, everything together. And as a child, as a Black child, a little Black girl, I, learned really early what racism was, not in a very sophisticated context, but more so in just noticing how I was treated differently. But it wasn't until I was 12 years old, my dad was driving me to school, and we got pulled over by the police, which I didn't really think anything about in the moment. Police are good. I was always taught that, policemen are there to help. They're the community helpers, right? Well, in this instance, as the police officer was approaching the car, my dad was, both hands on the steering wheel like this. He approached the car with his firearm drawn and was pointing it directly into the window at the side of my dad's head. So I want to first say, if you need to take a minute, because that was a lot for this story, please do so. But that was my first interaction with racial trauma. It was the first time that I saw my dad, who's this big guy, grown man, and really is such a protector, have to minimize his natural human emotions and deal with minimizing his dignity in front of his child just to get through that experience and just to get through not being shot. And at 12 years old, I understood that. And that's when my parents started having the conversations with me about what to do, if you interact with police and things like that. That moment was very traumatic for me. And it's something that I had to, talk about in therapy and have lots of conversations with my dad about, because it was the first time that the person who I always thought was the protector of me, I'm always safe with my dad. Well, now he's unsafe. And that was a lot to accept. It was a lot to come to terms with. And especially as a 12-year-old child, you're coming to terms with the world of someone ready to take you out, and they don't even know you. Nothing is going on. There's really no reason for it. So things like that are experiences that happen to marginalized communities all of the time. And it's things like that a lot of times we just sort of get through and deal with without understanding that there's a biological thing happening in our bodies when we experience those. We experience it. He went on to work, I went on to school, and there was all of this, pent up cortisol just sitting in our bodies from that experience that was left unmetabolized. So when that happens and it's left unmetabolized, it's literally passed down generation to generation. So that's one example of it, how it happens. And that was my first experience, my first interaction with that type of trauma. Oops. So through the years, I've done a lot to heal that trauma. And like I say here, it's a journey, because I don't think it's something that you ever sort of reach an end point for. That's why we have practices that help us heal, but it's a healing that happens continuously on the journey of life. So like I mentioned, I'm going to start from left to right here. This is me about 5 or 6 years old. This is when I really started to notice that I was different. I experienced a lot of race-based bullying from this age, from about kindergarten, first grade. And that's when I realized I was different. I started to want to straighten my hair instead of wear it like how it naturally grows out of my head. So this is an example of that on picture day. I was really, really proud. I felt really good, but it was the first time that I did pictures with straight hair, and it was a very big deal for me. But when I look back at it, I'm like, okay, I look really happy. It was a fun day. But again, I realized that I was made to feel like my natural state was not good enough or it was inferior. And as a child, that's something that I was feeling and was experiencing, even though I didn't have the language for it. So fast forward to here, this is me and a couple of my classmates at Alabama A&M University. So I went to a HBCU, a historically Black college or university for college. This was us at our honors program retreat. And this was a pivotal time in my life for healing racial trauma, because it was the first time in my life that I was surrounded and really like soaked in an environment that nurtured my Blackness outside of my own house, which is something that a lot of people, a lot of Black people especially, don't always have that experience of. I grew up in from elementary to high school. I was like the only Black kid in my class. So my parents worked really, really hard at making sure that I was educated and building up that confidence in my culture and who I was, but it was always in the house. And so this was the first time that I got to experience it outside of the house, and it made a huge impact on my life. In the middle here is my son, Makai. This is actually an older picture of him. He's 15 now and is like a foot taller than me. But this was in 2016. He was, I think, like maybe 8 or 9 there. And he loved Nerf guns. That was a big thing for him. And you can see how happy he is. He's got like all his, he's suited and booted and ready to go have his little Nerf war with his neighborhood friends, which was, the Nerf wars were always at our house. So I feel like I'm still picking up the little Nerf bullets even today. But this picture is really significant. This is when I had to start having the conversations with him about how to handle himself if he ever has an interaction with the police at 8 years old. I had to tell him, no, Makai, you can't play with these guns outside of the house. You can only play with these inside. And explaining to an 8-year-old who all he cares about is his Nerf war and having fun, it's a tough conversation to have. And it's one that a lot of parents of Black children have to have, because it's more important to equip our children to deal with the realities of society than it is to not do that. That can actually cause a lot of trauma, not just for the child, but for the parent as well, because you're dealing with all these feelings that this isn't fair, but at the end of the day, I just want my kid alive, and that's what's most important. So now he is taller, like I said, and the fear and the worry just sort of heightens every single year. He gets older and taller and his voice gets deeper. And that's a trauma. That is an example of racial trauma that if I didn't have the tools to navigate, I mean, it's debilitating almost. So that was an important sort of realization in my journey of healing and understanding racial trauma and how it's passed down generation to generation. And then next here is my wedding day. That's me and my husband, Jamie. So like I said, we are a blended family, an interracial family. And Jamie is a former federal police officer. He worked for several years as a police officer at the Pentagon. He's also a military veteran. And so my, marriage with him and getting to know him really opened up my eyes and my ears about the experience of police officers. And my relationship with him was pivotal in that racial trauma healing journey, because I was able to understand what the experiences are in a police body and what is happening in real time, and how, how much or how little goes into sort of cultivating that body practice, the noticing and behavior changes that lead to responsible policing. So he's a big part of my life journey, period, because he's my life partner, but is a big part of my racial trauma healing journey as well. And then this is me on good old North Avenue, where we've done a lot of protesting in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. When I moved here in 2016, I was really activated by the Sherman Park riots and everything that resulted in that. And I just wanted to get so involved into the community. And it took me a minute to really understand, the historical racial trauma that has existed in this area for so long. I was actually born in San Jose, California, lived in Atlanta, Georgia for several years, which is like Black Hollywood, right? So I had no idea about the context and what the historical context that comes with this area. And so it really motivated me to get involved, but also to learn more about the racial trauma that exists in societies and is passed down over time through people, through generations, and also how to develop those tools to sort of use this self-care for myself while I was doing that work in the community as well. So learned a lot over the years, still a lot to learn. And as I've gone down the way, as I go along, I have learned, the older that I get, especially, that understanding the connection between what's happening in the world around us and how our bodies really respond to it matters. It matters so much. And especially when it comes to healing racial trauma, surviving for a lot of Black folks, we've just got to survive it, right? Surviving isn't the same as healing. And there's things that we have to do, all of us, because all of us are touched and impacted by white body supremacy everywhere in the world. There's things that we have to do to maintain ourselves so that we can navigate it, heal it, process that clean pain, and go out into the community to make our communities better. So with all of that, a lot of the learnings and hopes that I have for you, there's a lot. And one of the things that I developed from this book is learning that being outside in nature is a body practice for me. I love to forest bathe when it's not snowing and super cold out, but I love to be out in the woods and really connect with nature. And so that's something that I've learned from the book, and I encourage for all of you to find those internal and external environments where you feel most in touch with your body and can listen to what it's telling you. Visit that place every single day to metabolize the stress that we all are sort of bombarded with every second of the day. And then learn to listen and understand the stories of people around you. One of the things that this book really taught me is that before this book, I thought that, racism really was more so just impacting, Black people and people of color. I didn't realize that there is a significant impact on white people as well, experiencing racism and experiencing that racial trauma. And it really allowed me to open up and understand those stories of people around me so that I could see the human in them and relate that human to the human in me as well. And then lastly, consistently seek the truth in love. Love is the oxygen. It's the basis for everything. And every time that we seek the truth in love, we gain that understanding, we make ourselves better, and we make the world just so much better. So that is it. I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat if you have them. And thanks for listening to me today.
Well, thank you so much, Sienna. Wow, what a powerful story that you shared with us. Thanks so much. I've gotten to know you the past couple of years in some work with Tosta together. And, I think we met a bit initially on Zoom because it was during the pandemic, and I was so excited when I finally got to, meet you in person. So please, again, put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. I'm so glad, Sienna, that you talked about, reading the book and encouraging people to read the book. And you and I had an earlier conversation where you've read this book many times, and I've read pieces of this book many times and found wherever I was in my place of life, I found something else that spoke to me. And I think you had mentioned the same thing too. So one of the questions that was asked is, how do you apply what you've learned from the book into your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work, and also maybe how you also do that in your own personal life as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if I would be able to do my job and my work without knowing some of the things that were taught in this book. I've read it a bunch of times, and Erica mentioned this before, and it spoke to me. I listened to it too. I'm a big audio book person because that's just auditory sensory is how I best receive information. So highly recommend, if you have access to audiobooks, to check that out. But really, I think the biggest thing that helps me apply, or the biggest piece that I apply to the work that I do is, I do work in the community, but my 9 to 5 is a corporate job, right? I'm doing like social centered work for a business. It's a business. And so the book and learning body practices, but also having a really almost like a magnifying glass on the different experiences of not just Black bodies, but white bodies, police bodies. It's helped me really develop a skill of meeting people where they are in whatever milestone of their human experience journey that they're at. At the end of the day, we all have our experiences. Society is going to be, society, right? It's going to do what it does. But we all have different things that we bring that we don't always know just by, looking at somebody or having like 1 or 2 conversations with them. And so learning the body practices, but also seeing it from different perspectives, those different body perspectives really helps me in my job. So when I have a meeting or I'm doing a business case for a business leader, I can sit back and ask the right questions to understand, okay, where are they at? What are their experiences? Because that's going to help me understand how they'll receive the information and really just what their outlook is. And so I really like to first start out by modeling that. So like today, I talked a lot about my social identities. I talk a lot about, kind of where I'm at and what my specific lens is. And that helps open up other people to share. And then we meet in the, we're building bridges to meet in the middle and collaborate on whatever it is that we're trying to do.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you tell the difference between maybe this is more personal for you, or anyone, between surviving and healing? Because you mentioned about you want to be more than surviving, or more than, you want to heal, you don't want to just survive.
That's a big one. That's a big one. And honestly, the book talks a lot about this, Resmaa, especially in the first part of the book, when he's really sort of directing towards the Black bodies audience. He talks a lot about this. This is also something I've learned and discovered over years of therapy as well. But there is a difference between healing and surviving. So like I mentioned before, I'm in a blended family. I was a single mom for several years. And through that trauma that I experienced with, having to, quickly become a single mom without any sort of choice or doing of my own, I survived, and I did it well. I built up resilience. I did the whole, by the bootstraps things. I took care of myself and my son in a lot of ways. And what that did, though, is it literally sort of changed the way that my brain worked. So now because I got so good at surviving, now I'm expecting the stuff, right? I'm expecting the bad stuff to happen. And with that comes a lot of anxiety. It comes a lot of just, being unsettled all the time. When you feel that in your body, that means something's not healed, right? Or there's an opportunity for something to heal. So even though I may exemplify, being strong and resilient, which are great qualities, to have, even if even if they're built out of pure necessity, right? That's not the same thing as healing the trauma that prompted the survival in the first place. And so when we recognize that there is something to address in the first place, that is where the healing starts. Recognizing the thing is starting with the body. Your brain isn't going to tell you, your body will.
So even if some things might have personally happened in your life, you might be doing healing. Another question that kind of came is, how do you deal with trauma that might have happened like generations ago?
Yeah.
How does somebody, kind of deal with that?
So I ask a lot of questions. I like to get stories from my parents, my grandparents. I was born in the Bay Area. I have great uncles that were part of the Black Panther Party. My family has always been a little militant, like very, don't let anybody, tell you that your Blackness isn't great, right? And as I got older, I noticed after hearing stories from my dad, like my dad grew up in segregation. He actually integrated his elementary school. He was fighting teachers when he was like 7 and 8 years old, like fist fighting teachers because they were calling him the N-word in class. And so when you hear about those things, you ask questions, you hear the stories, then you realize where they're at and why they have the lens that they have, right? So I think asking questions as much as you can, as much as you're able to, I think is really, really important. And if you have the blessing and the luxury to still be in connection and contact with people in your family or close to your family that have come before you, get those stories because they're really, really pivotal, and they'll help you understand what might be inside of you that you haven't identified yet, so that you can do that healing.
And I'm assuming you share probably some of the stories with your son, as well, so that he has this understanding of his ancestors and what gone through and how it might relate with him.
Yeah. But it's also positive too. We experience trauma, but to me, it's like, okay, this is where this comes from. Maybe I need to sort of keep an eye on how my body responds to this thing. But I also have an enormous amount of gratitude and just pure awe and admiration as well. My ancestors have been through a lot, but the one thing that's also passed down is also joy, is also having the ability to just be really authentic, and Black joy is something that has been passed down to me as well, which I'm very grateful for that.
Well, we have a couple more questions. We'll see with the time. One of the other questions was, how do you think the racial trauma manifests itself in this highly segregated communities like Milwaukee and our surrounding communities?
Yeah. I think it comes up in a lot of ways. And I think the ways that racial trauma shows up in communities like this is, we see the very overt, actions and behaviors, the very, when I moved here, people were like, well, don't go past 60th Street, right? Because it's dangerous. It's like, oh, you mean that's just where all the Black people are? So you see it in kind of like, visually physical segregated ways. But I think a lot of it is embedded in just like the subconscious, right? That we have subconscious sort of, I like to say, if you have a brain, you have bias, like all of us do. All of us do. And I think in areas where racial trauma is so deeply, deeply, deeply embedded into the systems, the even just the layout, the civic organizing of these people live here, these people live here, you go to this store for that, all of that over several years, it causes all of our brains to just subconsciously accept that conditioning, right? And so it doesn't matter who you are, we're all victim to white supremacy, white body supremacy, all of us. And I think when we start to understand it and see it where it is in our surroundings, but also in ourselves and how we respond to it, then it helps us reframe, like, I don't want to be a victim to this thing that somebody made up that I have nothing to do with, right? So that's, I think, is a really great way to recognize that. Stop and notice what's around you. Stop and notice how you might react to seeing somebody walk by, or somebody that you pass on the street. What is like your natural kind of gut body response to that? And then ask yourself, why do I respond that way?
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked a lot about the conditioning that happens for all of us, and that the racial trauma just does not, it also impacts white people, and we may not think about it in that way. Well, we're not racist, we're not doing that kind of stuff, but it is there, it's underlying, and it's certainly so embedded. So thank you so much, Sienna, for all your wisdom. I appreciate it. Okay, at this point in time, we're going to be taking about a 10-minute intermission, and we'll come back to our next presenters after that. Well, welcome back, everyone. Glad to see you. Our next presenter, Geof Swain, has served as an associate professor in family medicine and community health at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Medicine and Public Health, and as a faculty member at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Dr. Swain also served for 26 years as medical director for the City of Milwaukee Health Department, and before that practiced family medicine as a physician and as a residency program faculty member. Geof is the founding director of the Wisconsin Center of Health Equity. He continues to support the Wisconsin Population Health Service Fellowship Program, and in 2022 is serving as president of the Wisconsin Public Health Association, which named him the 2020 recipient of their Carol Graham Lifetime Achievement Award. Geof is a former member, past president, and now friend of UCN. Geof. You're muted.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yay.
Oh boy. Not my first Zoom. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to join this excellent panel. And I want to start and follow Sienna's lead for folks that maybe can't see me for whatever reason very well. And just describe a little bit about myself. I'm an old white guy. I'm in my 60s. I'm got a little salt and pepper beard. Used to have short hair. Now I have sort of medium length, light brown turning gray. And I'm wearing an Italian driving hat for no particular reason. And glasses. And also I have a little hearing loss too. So let me know if you can't hear me well. I want to talk a little bit as a physician, as a public health physician, and dig in a little bit more to some of the things that Sienna talked about in terms of how trauma affects people's bodies and the physiology behind it. People use the word trauma. I tend to use the phrase toxic stress, chronic stress a little bit more. There's probably some important subtle distinctions between the two. But I'll talk about it in terms of stress. And first of all, I want to say that everybody has stress. Everybody has stress. And stress can sometimes be good. In fact, Reverend Julie at the beginning, I think, urged us to think about getting a little bit uncomfortable. And that's a good place, like this place where you have a little fear and a little hope, right? That is something, that is where the growth happens. And so hopefully we can get to that place. But what happens when bodies are under stress is the body reacts physiologically, and it reacts in two main ways with two main kinds of hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And cortisol does a lot of good things for you when you're under stress. You can imagine sort of this fight or flight response. I don't know, you're being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, or you're rescuing your infant from a burning car after an accident or something, right? You have to have a physiology that will allow you to survive and thrive and rescue your infant. So what you need glucose running around in your bloodstream so that your muscles have energy to run or fight or whatever you're going to do. And cortisol is great at that. Cortisol drives glycogen out of the liver, turns it into glucose, and you got fuel. And adrenaline is something else you need. That increases your blood pressure and allows blood flow to get to the muscles. You need that because your muscles need oxygen, and you've got to fight the saber-toothed tiger, or you got to run, right? So you need these things. But when the stress is over, these things are supposed to go back down to normal, right? Your cortisol levels are supposed to go back down to normal. Your adrenaline levels are supposed to go back down to normal. And you can go on and be healthy. But when you have chronic stress, toxic stress, your cortisol and adrenaline levels stay high. And what happens then? Well, suddenly you've got a lot of glucose running around in your bloodstream that you don't need. That's called diabetes. It's also affecting your glucose metabolism, making you more at risk for obesity. Cortisol is also a very potent immune suppressant. So suddenly you're more at risk for infections. You're more at risk for chronic illnesses like cancer and other kind of chronic illnesses. Adrenaline, yes, you want your blood pressure up in the short term so you can run away or rescue your baby, but in the long term, you really don't want your blood pressure up. And when you have chronic stress, your adrenaline levels stay high, your blood pressure stays high. That's not good, puts you at risk for stroke and heart disease. And if you're a woman, it makes you more at risk to have a preterm infant. So these are all not helpful things for health in the long run. And what's more is chronic stress can actually affect the way your genes express themselves through a process called DNA methylation. And you may have heard this term epigenetics. I'm not going to get into it in a great deal, but it doesn't change your genes exactly, but it changes the way they're expressed. And so what happens is that you have this sort of good stress that everybody needs that comes and goes. You respond to it, you become stronger, and that's great. Or chronic toxic stress, which nobody needs and is bad for your health, and worsens your health over time and passes down from generation to generation to generation, which is some of the things that I think this book is getting at. And so these kind of toxic stress can come from a number of ways. So, it can be a very sort of singular traumatic experience, like the one that Sienna talked about with as a 12-year-old with her father and the police officer, or it can be a chronic pileup of day-to-day things that aren't so dramatic in the moment, but just continue to add up and add up and add up. And again, there's no respite from it. And so when there's no respite, then the cortisol and adrenaline levels stay high and the consequences are not good. So these can be things like the chronic experience of discrimination, so racism, any other form of discrimination. So here you get into issues of intersectionality with racism and sexism and homophobia, and like these things all pile on top of each other, and the experience of these things adds up in the cortisol and adrenaline area. It can be issues around lack of access to jobs or services or transportation, or safe neighborhoods or quality education or safe and affordable, stable housing, a sense of belonging. Like these things are all piling up. And in this country, unfortunately, there's a tight correlation between racism and all these other issues, right? So we see these pile up, and that is why we see such significant health disparities, health inequities across race and across other groups where there's differential in power. And basically that's what it comes down to is this imbalance between the experience of chronic stress and having the resources to either mitigate, remove, or manage that stress. And so we see this pile up over time. So I want to just shift gears for just a minute and talk a little bit more about myself, and then I want to leave plenty of time for Erica. So I was born in Milwaukee. I grew up in Wauwatosa, and I had a pretty stable childhood. My parents were both well educated. They were teachers. We weren't rich, but we were, not going to be homeless anytime. And so, I have a very low ACE score. For those of you who aren't familiar with ACE scores, ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And, as a result of that, I had a lot of advantages. I had a lot of unearned privilege between all those things and my white skin. I've got some earned privilege, but I can tell you that the MD and the MPH after my name are the result of both earned and unearned privilege. And I like to joke with people and tell them that in some ways, the only way that I could have had more unearned privilege would be if I were taller or better looking. This is helpful for me. But what it doesn't get at is that I also too have my own stressors, my own history, and this book gets at some of those kinds of things that are fairly common experiences. And what it doesn't get at is whether or not I can figure out a way to approach those experiences in a way that allows me to work through this clean pain, or whether I'm going to choose a path that's more dirty pain. There's a lot of alcohol in my family, for example. That's managing pain with a dirty pain response. And so I think this idea of managing one's own body, noticing one's own body is really, really important. Paying attention. So as a white person in particular, a lot of folks on this, participants here, want to make the world a better place. A lot of UUs most UUs want to make the world a better place. It's one of the things I love about UUs. It starts at home. It starts with me. It starts with each of us. So being able to notice how my body reacts, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I see a person coming towards me, and I start to make some judgments about that person and my safety, depending on all kind of things about them, but mainly about how they look and how I'm making assumptions about how they look and what that means. And so if you haven't looked into the Harvard Implicit Association Test, I encourage you to check that out, but do it when you're in a good, calm space, because I think of myself as a pretty good guy, but when I take that Harvard Implicit Association test, turns out that my unconscious is a racist, and my unconscious is a homophobe, and my unconscious is a sexist, and it's ageist and ableist, and like not how I like to see myself. But if I can't stay calm about that and try to be honest with myself about that, understand that that is not surprising given the world in which I grew up and that I currently live, and try to manage that and try to figure out how to address that. That's I think where the work is. And so I want to leave you with two quotes, and I'll put them in the chat as well. I ran across these completely separately. One is from the then Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, and the other is from James Baldwin. And Chodron says, the most fundamental aggression we do to ourselves is to remain ignorant by not having the courage to look at ourselves honestly and gently. And Baldwin says ignorance, right? Chodron is just talking about remaining ignorant by not looking at ourselves gently and honestly. Baldwin says ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. So I will leave you with that. Happy to answer any questions and looking forward to hearing Erica's remarks as well.
Thank you so much, Geof. I really appreciated you talking about in this work of, the body work you're doing, or if we're like you used in the body of doing racial justice work or social justice work, it really starts with the person and with each of us, and to be really aware of those unconscious biases that we carry. And I really appreciate you disclosing some of your own personal biases based on the that Harvard test, which somebody, Sienna, thank you for putting that in the chat. So, and also there was a request for about the ACEs quiz. Sienna, again, put it in the chat for us. So one of the things that several people asked is, could you explain a little bit more about the adverse childhood experiences, the ACE, like what kinds of things are typically might be looked at in that when you're answering kind of those questions for yourself.
Right. So there's a list of 10, which is just sort of the way that it's been studied. I'm sure it's not exactly 10, but so these are things like having experienced physical or emotional or sexual abuse as a child. They're things like having had a parent with a serious drug or alcohol issue as a child. Things like having had a parent incarcerated as a child. So these now, I said before that I sort of like think about trauma and chronic stress in similar ways, but the adverse childhood experiences are big T traumas. They are the things that really make it difficult for a child to feel safe and secure and stable. They're things that cause that child's cortisol and adrenaline levels to be high and stay high over, chronically, and therefore adversely affect not only their physical health but their mental health going forward. And so certainly there are plenty of people with high ACE scores that do great, right? So you shouldn't think of it as a some kind of a immutable sentence for a horrible life or anything like that. But on average, people with higher ACE scores have more challenges with mental health. They have more challenges with their physical health. They have more challenges with having a successful economic future. So on average, more childhood trauma means more struggle as an adult.
Thank you. Are the effects of chronic stress or trauma different in children versus adults? How might it be different, and how might it manifest differently?
Well, I think there's some similarities and some differences. I think chronic stress for children is worse. So imagine two people, like, and one of them had a very safe and secure childhood with very low levels of chronic stress. And then as an adult gets into some kind of situation that has a high level of chronic stress. That person probably has a lot more psychological resources to be able to manage that new adult stress and figure it out. If it's the other way around, the chronic stress that children experience gets into the body and stays there, even when that stress goes away as an adult. And you can see this actually by looking at preterm birth rates. So I mentioned before about how cortisol and adrenaline in particular affect women's risk of delivering preterm. And so when little girls experience chronic stress, it affects their physiology in a way such that if later on in their life that chronic stress is gone, they are still at high risk of delivering their infants preterm. That chronic stress that they experience as a child sticks around in the body in ways that are similar to how this book is talking about the way stress gets embodied. So yeah, I think there are some ways that it's similar, but I think chronic stress for children is even a bigger problem.
And how is this topic taught, like, about chronic stress trauma, and maybe also with the racial disparities that you were talking about? How is that taught, like, at the medical schools, in the training for new physicians?
Yeah, wait, do we have another hour? Medical schools are starting to do a better job at this, but let me just try to. I really want to leave plenty of room for Erica here, and I'm watching the clock. I'll just say briefly that I think one of the other big places that medicine is struggling with is yes, and thanks for that comment in the chat just now. Thank you. Is that we all have, most of us have implicit biases, and that certainly includes physicians and other healthcare providers. And as a result, people of color and other groups, unfortunately, get treated differently because healthcare providers are not, unconscious biases are unconscious, right? You have to look really, really hard to see just a little corner of it, and you have to be open and willing to see it. And that's really hard work, and that is not taught very well in medical schools. And as a result, when Martin Luther King Jr. said, of all forms of injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane, I think there's a point to that, because we've got a long ways to go to eradicate or even minimize those injustices in healthcare.
Thank you. And then, are you seeing any differences of how racial trauma versus non-racial trauma might manifest in the body, or is it?
I don't. I would defer to other folks on the panel here. Personally, from my point of view, I agree so strongly with what, one of the things that Sienna emphasized early on. Race is something that we've made up. It doesn't, like, black bodies and brown bodies and white bodies and any other bodies react to stress in the same way. Like the cortisol and adrenaline are not racialized.
Well, thank you so much. And if there's any more questions, we can get to them at the end of Erica's presentation. We probably will have a little bit of time for if there's any more questions. So I want to introduce Erica, and I forgot to put Geof's picture up earlier. So Our third presenter is Erica Turner. She is the executive director of Bridge the Divide, as well as a registered nurse and IT professional. She is an extraordinary, passionate advocate for building a world of racial justice and equity across all facets of her life, focused on forging relationships in the virtually all-white suburb community where her family lives, works, plays, and worships. She is committed to interacting with love, listening while reserving judgment, fostering healing from racial injustices, and waking up apathetic attitudes. Erica was featured in the Love Wisconsin online series, and since 2018 has been the recipient of many community awards, including the Spirit of Unity Award, NAACP Game Changers Award, YWCA Eliminating Racism Award, the Mequon Thiensville Rotary Paul Harris Fellow, and Rid Racism Spotlight Award. Bridge the Divide is a grassroots organization that began in 2018. They provide a forum for discussion and action around racial repair, racial reconstruction, and ultimately racial reconciliation. Bridge the Divide funds scholarships, hosts racially literate podcasts, coordinates educational programming and book studies, engages in community projects, and distributes monthly newsletters to promote lasting cross-cultural connections. Their goal is to facilitate community conversations that launch joint, achievable, sustainable solutions, especially in the North Shore suburbs and exurbs. In 2020, Bridge the Divide received the Family and Community Service Award from the Mequon Thiensville Sunrise Rotary Club for their efforts in building a loving, empathetic, and just community. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you so very much. Boy, it feels nice, right? It feels nice when you kind of look back and talk through the things. My name is Erica Turner. I am an African-American woman, dark skin, dark brown skin with locks and a lovely smile. How's that? That's how I'm presenting for you this morning. This afternoon? No, this morning still. I did not read My Grandmother's Hands until fairly recently. So the discussion that I want to have with you today is really learning from the book language that I didn't have, but that obviously fits in with so many things that I've experienced, so many ways that I have seen the clean and dirty pains manifested. So my conversation with you really is stories about myself, my life, my ways that I'm interacting, and how I can see all of these different parts of Resmaa's book playing out. So I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, to a single mom, but dad was around and very active. I kind of grew up in episodic poverty. I'm an only child. My mom was a very educated woman, and after she'd received her master's at the age of 35, she had her first heart attack. So the chronic illness is what launched us into poverty, and also kind of provided the lens as I'm seeing, going in for food stamps and talking about welfare and how folks, this is an inner city community, mostly Black and brown people, and how those people who were in power, who were mostly white people, addressed my mom and I, assuming that we're uneducated, don't know how to care for ourselves, don't know, because if you did, why would you be in this situation? Not, that she continued to work to get her PhD from her wheelchair when she was, could not recover from these multiple illnesses that undoubtedly were a part of the toxic stress that she experienced and the generational trauma from our family. So again, talking about some of the language that I was introduced to from this book, the colorism growing up, you're dark-skinned Black girl and not desirable. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you're in this inner city situation. The internalized racism then led to the toxicity layered of you have to get out, not simply of the poor area, the difficulty and the poverty, but getting out, escaping who you are and going over to the good side, the better schools. I unfortunately turned down the chance with a scholarship to Spelman to attend an HBCU because are we sure those are good enough schools? You know, I accepted a scholarship to Case Western Reserve University because that I know is a good school. And looking back at it again of the trying to escape who I was and how I showed up by attaching to the better, the good, which translated to white, right? So white schools, white professional organizations, white professions. You know, I am a nurse by trade. I'll talk a little bit about that. I now work in IT. You know, I'm always the only. There's always a handful. You know, kind of how I was drawn to those things, and not understanding how I was and why that happened. I left home, married to the military. So very grateful for my husband. This year, we celebrated 30-year anniversary. He is now retired. But with the military, you know, when we talk about not having choice really in regular conventional verbiage, you don't have a choice. You do what you're told, you go where you're told to go. We had a slogan that home is where the Army sent you. So that's what we did. We traveled around with the Army, not really engaging with my community much until we had a chance to live on the economy. So when you're not living on an Army post, when you're not living in an Army community and you're out with the regular civilians. And that's kind of where my eyes started to open with oh, you want to live in this community? Sure. Do you want to live with the Blacks? Do you want to live with the Latinos? Do you want to live with the whites? I'm like, what do you, no, I just want to live in this neighborhood. Well, you have to pick the neighborhood because, you know, the neighborhoods are segregated. And I didn't really pay attention to that when we were actively on the military post living with the military. So that was one of the first kind of, oh, okay, that's different, that's new. As I said, I'm an RN by background. So, you know, going to school to become a nurse and having to argue and fight with one of my instructors because we had white uniforms. You would wear white uniforms. And she said, you know, and make sure you all wear white underwear. That's the only way it won't show through your uniform. And I'm like, I know you're supposed to be, you know, my educator and I'm supposed to listen to you, but I can't wear white underwear. What are you talking about? Well, of course you can. Why are you arguing with me? And just, you know, from the very little things of, I have dark skin and wearing white underwear will make it show infinitely worse. Why do I have to fight with you about that? You know, I know this about myself. So even just starting out with school, those experiences came to mind after I became a nurse, working on a sickle cell unit, again, being the only Black nurse that was there and listening to my white colleagues talking about how these folks were probably just drug seeking. This pain isn't, even after we were all trained, pain is what your patient says it is to you. You're not experiencing it. You don't know. You have to listen to them. But how easy it was for my colleagues to say, no, it's probably not that. You know these folks. It's probably drug seeking. It's probably something that they want to get from us. They're not really in that much pain. And if you've ever seen a person in sickle cell crisis, I mean, how do you, we are taught better than this in school. We know better than that. Phlebotomy, being the person that always gets missed when they come in and poke me and get an IV or draw blood for the first time. Oh, sorry, your skin is so tough. You know, again, talking about in the book, the comparisons to the white body is the standard, is the norm, and yours is different. Well, because they were used to looking through fair skin and seeing veins, even though we're taught not to, we're taught to feel for them, but then feeling like I wasn't good enough because I have tough skin and I'm making it harder for people, and trying to interrupt that when my colleagues, if I would hear someone say that to a patient that we were working with, you know, this is not something that you say. Going to the doctor and having a person who hasn't interacted with African Americans before say, oh, I'm not sure I know why your gums are so dark. That's not normal. It absolutely is normal for someone with my pigment. And, just going through those experiences, again, not having the language to know that I'm internalizing things, this toxicity that others are projecting onto me, and not realizing why, not realizing that you have to advocate for yourself so much, because if you have dark skin, then does a wound show up the same way when someone is trying to diagnose, well, you don't have this kind of rash. Well, I don't see this. Well, you're used to seeing it on fair skin, and you're not trying hard enough to see what that looks like for dark skin. So some of those experiences, again, that reading my grandmother's hands kind of pointed to those things and put names to them and added that language that I didn't have. Raising my children with talking through the pervasive, persistent stress disorder, how I love my children so much. I have 3 adult children, 2 girls and a boy, but the hypervigilism, as Sienna pointed out, having to have the talk with my son, having to say to him, I know that all of your friends are over there playing at the playground and it's 10 o'clock at night, but you can't. No, you cannot play any first person shooter games. No, you can't have a water gun outside to pretend and chase. You cannot do that. I cannot have that kind of, happening to you. By the time he graduated from high school, that he had already had, I believe we counted 5 interactions with our police. I live in Cedarburg, so Ozaukee County, 97% white. Living there and bringing up my children there for the past 15 years, and having to interact with the police bodies that are there, who are, again, do you belong here? Followed my husband home for the first few weeks that we lived there, making sure that we were supposed to be there. They never stopped us. They never flipped the lights. And when you share those stories with other folks, you hear, oh, well, at least they didn't. Yeah, but that interaction still brought on full-on stress, as if we had been wrestled to the ground and handcuffed. It's still that feeling. It's still how we are processing this interaction. With my son, a lot of it was his motorcycle. Oh, we're just stopping to check your VIN number. Who? Harleys roll through Cedarburg all the time. Cedarburg is, the quintessential downtown of this lovely small town. Do you stop every giant white guy with all of his Harley gear to check his VIN number? Why are you checking this little guy that's on his bike, that's trying to love life, trying to live his best life, and you're stopping him just to check? I think probably the worst for my son was walking down the street, taking pictures. We always have all these beautiful yards and gardens, and there's so much wonderful outdoor space in the Midwest. Walking down the street about a half a mile from our home and having the police come because they were called by 3 different neighbors that there was a Black guy walking down the street. And so we're not talking about 1940s, we're not talking about 1960s, we're talking about 2020. This is the life, this better life, this greatness that we're trying to help our children create. And this is what they have to go through. So we have to have these conversations with them. We don't want them scared, we don't want them bitter, but we want the realism of, this is our life. This is how we move through this space. And you have to know it and understand it, because my opinion is not knowing it, it blindsides you. It really has a lot of hurt feelings. Like, what do you mean? I haven't done anything. So you have to kind of harden your heart a little bit to deal with it. So that resilience, it can come across as, this is good, you're being resilient, but some of it is really desensitizing yourself to what your actual feelings are. That's not fair. It's not fair that I can't walk down the street in my own town that, he's lived in since he was 4. Why? That's not fair. So the raising my children, I was very focused, super mom, only child, single Black mom, you always have to be twice as good anyway. So I had that internalized from the beginning. And then raising children, you must be super mom because you cannot let them see anything that would be remotely similar to the stereotypes, the myths that people believe about you anyway. So make sure your music is turned down. No, you can't dress that way. All of these things that, you know, my mom guilt, then like you impose these things on your children to make them seem better in the eyes of the folks that that you can't take back. You can't go back now, but that was the best that I could do, how to do the best for my children and do those things for my children, the paying the black tax. Exactly. So as my children got older, I had more time in my life, in my day, still working full time, transitioned from being an RN at the bedside to working in IT in healthcare, which was a lovely transition. And it took me from working with mostly white females to mostly white males. So, you know, climbing the corporate ladder, doing all the things that you are supposed to do for the American dream. But boy, did that just add to the stress. It added so much more that I just didn't think that I would have to encounter. I thought that I had encountered all the things. What I had though was a little bit more time in my life because my children were older. And in 2018, as they said, we launched Bridge the Divide, which was the intent was in Ozaukee County, right? It's in my backyard. I don't need to start something to talk to other people in other areas. This was a group that we wanted to address the 97% white population in Cedarburg, the 92% white population in Ozaukee County, and how to love each other well, how to decrease fear, how to talk through the issues of proximity. You know, are you so jumpy when you see me walking around in my Black skin and my daughters walking into the local local shops and wondering if they belonged here, wondering if they had enough money to buy anything, wondering if they were supposed to be here? What ways could I engage with the people around me to decrease that fear, to help them understand? And as Resmaa pointed out in the book too, you know, like, it's all a mind thing. I just need to teach you. I just need to educate you. I'm not talking about visceral responses in your body that are there. I'm like, no, you just don't understand. You just haven't met me. You haven't met my family. You just don't understand. So that was kind of how we started that process. Bridge the divide, meet people where they are, hold on to their hands, provide a safe yet brave space where you can bring in people and invite them to discuss what things are uncomfortable for them and why. Invite them to kind of sit in the discomfort once they've identified it, so they can kind of understand it's not really a rational thing. There really shouldn't be a fear of that person. That person didn't do or say anything that should make you fearful. But having those conversations, active listening, not the just in line syndrome. Oh, well, I hear what you said, but I'm really not privileged because I've had it hard. I had to, you know, get a job when I was 15. So see, I'm not privileged. Okay, we need to talk about that a little bit more. You know, intent versus impact, not generalizing. Storytelling, because I've found that in the community that I live, people do community differently. A Black woman in the inner city, you know, talk about beloved community. Like, we are for each other. We want all the best for each other. I've always felt in my area that things are more transactional, like that it's not for love of other and for the good of all of us. It felt very transactional. So I thought that a part of it was telling stories. We need to share these stories. So I did learn from one group that you tell stories from your scars, not from your wounds, right? So you need to be able to talk about things that you've had some healing from, so that you can have appropriate kind of discussions, conversations about them. So Bridge the Divide was really a space that I created for the people who were really inflicting, recreating the most trauma for me. And I put all of that energy into that for them. And we'll talk a little bit later too about not focusing as much on me and my family and other Black and Brown people for their healing, for their joy. We spend a lot of time advocating. So we do have a connection. We try to build relationship with the school district. We try to show the schools, the superintendent, school board, their blind spots that you just don't understand, you don't see. Again, let me help educate you, because that's how you're going to fix an issue. I'm a project manager, right? We got a plan. We're going to educate you. We're going to show this. Here are milestones. But interacting with the school boards, even a Black woman standing up in a room full of white folks that are so adversarial, that are so anti-hearing what I had to say, which was really just expressing a perspective that they didn't know and didn't understand. And I was sharing with them, sharing in the spirit of helping and making this better. And what I received back was the anger, I at one point had to file a defamation lawsuit against a woman, just destroying of reputation. You folks are doing this, and not really hearing what we were saying, not really caring for Black and Brown children, which is what we were begging them to do, not really showing in their curriculum that Black and Brown people are a part of our history. Black history is American history. Let's teach that. Let's be honest. Let's teach that. Showing literature that has Black and Brown people as the protagonists. Why is that a hard thing? Why is that a difficult thing? Why can we not go through our curriculum and take out things that have Black people as tokens, that are reinforcing stereotypes, that are living in the myths that folks have created about us? So I thought that I was doing this great and wonderful thing. It has been a big struggle. It has made me look more on how I need to handle the pain, right? The clean pain and the dirty pain. I was working with people who were dealing with a lot of dirty pain, and standing up and speaking the truth, although it felt empowering and it was an honest, authentic request from me that folks do some introspection, look at what they're doing and change, but that doesn't change their dirty pain, right? And then that's just kind of drawing me into that more. So that fight, that stand up, speak up, very important, still a big part of my life. But I have also recently shifted to the self-care. I have taken a sabbatical from the work, from the vision of trying to help other people, to help process my pain, to help heal myself and my family from the trauma that just gets recreated. We lay ourselves bare so that others can learn and grow. And then we sit there with that non-metabolized pain. Just, I bubbled up to the surface for you, and now I feel it. And when Resmaa talks about the anchors, the 5 anchors, it's funny looking back and going, is that what I was doing? I have got my knitting and crocheting, sitting at those school board meetings with the stress, with the anxiety, with the being hyper vigilant, crocheting and knitting like I was, running for my life, and not realizing that was one of the ways that I was processing, with the rhythmic movement, with the sound, listening to the sounds of needles as they're crossing over the fabric, the yarn that you're using. I didn't know how much I needed that. I didn't know how much I loved that. But that was one of the things that I had been doing to soothe myself. I think now it is more of a connection with God's nature. I am doing the things. I laughed when Sienna talked about fishing. It's one of my Black people don'ts that I know in my head is not true, but the Black people don't fish. Black people don't camp. Black people don't swim. Black people don't RV. And I have my RV and I'm going out and doing all of those things. Black people don't ski. I don't like the cold. So I don't know if that's going to be one that I'm going to try to debunk. I might have to leave that one on my list. But that love, that self-love, that healing of self, even the short time that I've been out in the woods, looking at the trees, watching the birds for no reason, going, wow, that sure is beautiful. It's been a really beautiful point of healing. And I can be here. I can just be. I am not in the space where I can see all those traumas all the time at my home, walking downtown and having people cross the street. So they're walking over. I'm like, this is a friendly place. Everybody talks to everybody, but here people just take off and cross the street if we're walking down the street. Not wanting to go to a grocery store at home because even if someone doesn't say anything, when I walk in, stops and there's silence and there's a look and that internal question of, do you belong here? Are you supposed to be here? Okay. So taking this sabbatical and focusing on the clean pain and working through some of those anchors to make sure that I and my family can heal and love ourselves. And then in the spirit of resistance, jump back into the fight again. So thank you so very much for the UUs for inviting me to kind of share some of my experiences today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Erica. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat box. Thank you so much for sharing your personal and also your professional stories as an, on our end, what you've seen, and highlighting the experiences that those particular communities that you live in normalize the white body, as the standard, and how that impacts people of color and in everyday little bits of life. And, I think as Geof had explained, like when you have those things that happen day after day after day after day, the impact that it has on the bodies of Black and other, BIPOC people. So thank you so much for sharing that. You speak, one of the things you spoke about was about beloved community among Black women in the city wanting each other to thrive. And how do you think building beloved community between communities can happen?
The persistence, which I think saying that it takes a community, understanding that I am not a superwoman. The strong Black woman myth needs to be bunked and debunked millions of times over that, and that it is not my responsibility to make someone else better if they don't want to engage in this conversation. So I think it can happen. I think it dealing with the white body supremacy and working on yourself as an individual before coming to the table, I think has to happen. Because I did not know all of those steps, trying to just attack it with, but I'm a nice person and you'll have to see how you're wrong. It doesn't work when that group is dealing with all their dirty pain themselves. So I think it can happen. I think those relationships can be built, but I think there has to be the people in the community, the white people in the community working with the other white people in the community to deal with their pain so they can come to the table and we can deal with the clean pain together a little bit more.
Thank you. You provide such a wonderful example what you're doing about your own self-care. And I know when we met earlier this week, you're talking to Sienna and the rest of us were like, oh, well, we would kind of do what you're doing, doing your journey about your self-care. So thank you for sharing the stories about the, self-care, because I know in the work of racial justice work that is so critically important to do, and to take that time to, heal yourself. And I loved when you said about, coming from a place from your scars, not your wounds, because you're doing the healing piece. So thank you for that piece as well. Another question was, now that your children are adults, what do they say about their experience growing up and maybe their experience with racial trauma?
Yeah, it's a hard one to listen to, right? It's a hard pill to swallow when your adult children, as they're processing, can say, oh yeah, I remember in 10th grade this happened. And I'm like, what do you mean? You didn't tell me that. Well, no, we didn't tell you because we knew that you would be up at the school and then things would be worse for us and you left, So then they internalize things because you learn quickly, right? How to be safe, what it means to be safe. And it can feel safe to not confront those things. And I can't put that all on the children. I do that now at work. As things happen, as I hear things, as I'm confronted with things, I have to decide, is this response that I want to make going to be worth my job? What promotion am I not going to get if I speak up about this? Having to speak to a white male peer and say, you cannot decide how I speak and how I interact, and I'm not going to take that from you. And then sitting back and wondering, I wonder if this is my last day. This is, so I completely understand, but it was really difficult having them as adults process through things that they had buried. That, again, speaking to their teachers, the first time someone calls you the N-word in the hallway and you tell someone and they're like, you've got to be stronger, it's just words. So then you stop telling, and then you just keep internalizing that pain. So those are things that they're working through now, but also a part of the joy, being old enough to move to other areas and saying, wow, I don't have to be the only. I've never been in a space where I'm not the only. You're in a big city, you're on the East Coast, you're dealing with other ethnicities and other races that you didn't have the opportunity to because we were in this kind of town and that's where they grew up. So working through their pain in the clean way, and also exploring the joy that it is to be a Black person, and they're embracing that much more now.
Thank you. Another question is, what do you think is the best way for whites in the white suburbs to advocate for better understanding and change? What would you love to see?
Right. My experience has been a lot with you have to believe the stories that Black people are telling you. So many times there is oh my gosh, this happened, telling the story about my son. My son was walking down the street and the police officer pulled him over, or, stopped him. Oh, well, I mean, was he doing anything? Why is that the question? Why did you not hear what I was telling you and internalize the information that I gave you, rather than, oh, but there must be something else. That's never happened to me. Well, of course it's never happened to you. So I think a lot of the active listening, the believing the stories that people tell you can go a long way. I think that's a basic, a fundamental thing that we have to get folks to understand. You don't have to give an interpretation. You don't have to tell how that also a similar thing happened to you. No, it didn't. Don't tell that story. It's not a similar thing, So learning how some of those skills from Resmaa's book, learning how to not react in your fragility, in because of your white body supremacy, and stopping and listening, I think is a huge start.
Mm-hmm. And I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll get to there's a couple more questions to ask for all of you. Would you say a little bit more about coming from your scars, not just your wounds?
Sure. So I'll go back, my poor son. I'll go back to my son's last interaction with the police, where the police officer was very nice. Hey, what are you doing? Are you just walking? Yeah. Oh, okay. And he turned around and left, right? But even for me to be able to share that story with, oh, I shared it with God and country, let me tell you, with the police chief, with the sheriff of the county, I shared it with, everybody, because folks always say, well, that really doesn't happen. It does happen, and this is how it happened. But I couldn't share those stories with the police chief and the sheriff while I was still working through that pain, because it makes me very angry. With that wound wide open, I could not have a calm, rational conversation with someone about it, especially someone who I know was going to be defensive about what I was saying. Well, what were they doing? Well, has he been in trouble before? How? He was a Black man walking down the street. He doesn't need anything else. He should be able to just be. He should be able to just to be his authentic self walking down the street. So I had to wait until there were kind of some scabs on that wound to be able to have a conversation, to be able to talk about possibilities of change, to be able to, repeat the story and not feel the pain as intensely as I'm telling the story. And I am very glad that I did, that I was able to do that, because it's one of the few things that we can show tangibly that we've made a change in our town. They actually changed a policy in the city police department. A policy was changed because of that. It was, whenever there's a third party that calls in to report something, you didn't have to call and ask the person what the actual threat was. You didn't have to get all of these details. It's 3 people call you, holy cow, the sky is falling, let's get out there and save our constituency. Well, who did you ask? So, I think they call it race-based policing by proxy, I think is what they put the title in there. That no, it wasn't that police officer that was acting on racism. It was common citizens, but they don't get a pass, and it's the police officer's job to call and check and validate that there is suspicious activity, and not accept a call that says there's a Black guy in my neighborhood as criminal activity. So that was, but I could not have those conversations. The conversations while that wound was still wide open was with my family, with people who were loving and caring for me, as I was so angry and so sad and grieving the loss of childhood for my son, who at 19 has to explain why he is allowed to walk the streets of his neighborhood. And after those scars had started to heal up, that I could have those conversations.
Thank you so much. I just have, I think 1 or 2 more questions for all panelists. So Reverend Julie, if you can spotlight our others. And then, Erica, Geof, and Sienna, just chime in. Somebody noted, it seems that white people need to do the work of recognizing the way we've been traumatized by race before we can heal. And how do you think this book can help us start?
I'll go with that. I think within the book, it's very, there's a lot of pragmatic sort of prescriptive actions that you can take with the body-centered practices. And that is, I think, the best place to start. A lot of it is similar to just, doing different meditative practices, noticing. I think that's the biggest thing, is just really paying more attention within, when you're out and about in situations, or when you're sitting with yourself, when you're reading the book. Like I always say, when you read this book, like make time for it, get a nice little cozy spot, get your little cup of tea, get your favorite little blanket, get real comfy and cozy, so that you can make the space in your environment a place where you can notice what's coming up as you do the body-centered practices. So I think that's a great place to start. And I think also too, when you do that, you might realize that there's things coming up for you that aren't necessarily coming from a place of racial trauma, but exhibit through you know, or are triggered through racism around you or racial trauma like environment. So what Geof talked about earlier with the ACE test, you start to learn maybe there's things about my childhood or, you know, how I grew up that have nothing to do with race, but might play a part in how you react to different issues that you're confronted with race. So body-centered practices, noticing, paying attention to your body is the best start. And that is how you do it, really.
Erica, Geof, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I'll just add, I agree with all of that. And I think, you know, again, understanding that perfection is not attainable. And so a person can be a good person and be an imperfect person. I think, you know, one of the things that's wrapped up in the concept of white fragility is that it's really hard to see the things about ourselves that are not the people we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not in a good centered space in your body, it's going to be too hard. And so then you'll get into these dirty pain modalities of you know, alcohol or drugs or other kinds of behaviors that don't help you to make progress. So being faultless is not achievable, but learning and growing and changing is achievable and essential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And unlearning too, I think also is a part of that too. Being open to unlearn, and that's for everybody.
That is so, I'm glad you brought that up, Sienna. That is so true, because there's so much that we have been taught, you know, whether formally through school or through our families or through our lives, that you know, that play a part in that bias. And gotta unlearn a lot of things. Erica?
I think the sitting in discomfort, and as a person who, like I said, grew up in episodic poverty, we were able to kind of ebb and flow on what we had and what we didn't have, and when we had to live in the car, when we actually had an apartment to live in. I feel like most of the white people that I have come into contact with, middle class, suburb exurbs, have never had to be uncomfortable, you know? And so being able to sit, I'm used to it. You're used to not having, you're used to not doing, you're used to having to patchwork something together to make it happen. So this is just another of the, ooh, that feels really bad. I need to sit in it, kind of wrestle with it a little bit and work through it. But it's always been that way. I've always had that since my childhood. So I think that there's, if there's a piece to be able to work with sitting in discomfort and not, there has to be an instant fix. How do we do this? How do we go? We need to change. You need to be able to sit in that a little bit. And I don't know how to work through your baggage to sit still and just feel it. You got to feel it. And then after you felt it for a while, you can work on dropping your shoulders and dropping your tongue from the top of your mouth and stop gritting your teeth. But you need to have a little time just to sit in it. And I think that it's a big concept that people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis aren't really used to sitting in discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. We could spend more hours probably talking about a lot of different things. So I really do appreciate your time today. So on behalf of Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs, I wish to thank our presenters, Sienna, Geof, and Erica, for their time, expertise, and perspectives in helping us get a deeper understanding on my grandmother's hands and its relevance to the work that we need to do. I also want to thank you for your continual passion and dedication to racial justice and equity work. I want to thank our, before I have Rev. Julie do our closing words, I also want to thank the other contributors to this event, Lee and Lucy, who are part of the subcommittee the Black Lives Matter to UU, or to Wisconsin's UU, I always say that wrong, who have been a part of this subcommittee planning this event. I also want to say thank you to Rep. Julie for her part in this, and also to Dave, Kelly, and Vicky, her UUCW staff, who provided a lot of behind the scenes works for us. Again, you will be receiving email. This has been recorded. We'll be sending that out, as well as some announcements about further reflection and discussion groups for my grandmother's hands, and also how to become involved with Black Lives Matter to Wisconsin UUs. So now I will hand it off to Rep. Julie for our closing words.
Thanks, Karen. The closing words that I chose for today are words that were written by Reverend Gretchen Haley. And the words are, she titled this piece, "Surrendering to This Life." Give up the fight for some other moment, some other life than here and now. Give up the longing for some other world, the wishing for other choices to make, other songs to sing, other bodies, other ages, other countries, other stakes. Purge the past, forgive the future, for each come too soon. Surrender only to this life, this day, this hour, not because it does not constantly break your heart, but because it also beckons with beauty, startles with delight, if only we keep waking up. This is the gift we have been given, these body clothes, this heartbreak, this pulse, this breath, this light, these friends, this hope. May we remember ourselves, all a part of all of it, giving thanks together. Thank you all so much for being here.